Well, I don't normally use PowerPoints or puppets, if you were here last week, when I preach, but I thought that this has enough detail. I thought I would help you to follow along more than just with some notes. So, Twyla talked last week about 5 different styles of how we deal with conflict. Some of us in here are crocodiles. Some of us are some of those other animals she talked about. My style for years was that of a crocodile. I hope I've changed a lot. But I want to talk with you about resolving conflict biblically and the impact of personality today. Each of us are different, and our personality does impact our conflict resolution style. Now, I want us to begin with a confession. Okay? Because I want to get this deep within you, so we need to do some confession. So I want you to confess along with me, okay? Personality is not determinative of my behavior. Now, I know some of you don't believe that, but we're going to confess that. Personality is not determinative of my conflict style. Personality only influences my conflict style. I can change the style of conflict I choose to employ. Let's say that again. I can change the style of conflict I choose to employ. I can choose to handle conflict biblically. And I will choose to handle conflict biblically. Okay, now you just made some confessions so that you either need to abide by them or you are liars. Okay? And I don't think that you're liars, so I want to help you to understand how then you can do this. Now, I need to give you some introduction, and you may wonder, so where is this going? But after the introduction, I want to give you some illustrations of some very well-known biblical characters, and we're going to look at how they handled conflict according to this model for managing conflict. Now, here's the model. Okay, there is, you can see the kind of oval there, and you have 3 arrows coming in because you have lots of input into any kind of conflict. And you hopefully have just one decision coming out of the conflict. Now, when you come into conflict, some people want to, we're going to call it, create space. And other people are going to want to seek closure. And all of us would like to add some kind of value to the discussion of the conflict. Now, what do I really mean by that? What do these 3 stages actually look like? Well, creating space means creating a place, creating time, creating an opportunity to explore the issues from all sides. How many of you, when you are in a conflict situation, you want to talk about it? Anybody? You want to discuss it. You want to create a time that we can thoroughly look at all the options of this conflict, and we can explore it from all different sides. Adding value means enabling each person to recognize what is important for them and for the other person, and to pay attention to this when looking for a way forward. How many of you know that if Twyla and I have conflict, I have one way of looking at it, and she has a different way of looking at it? And that's why we have conflict. So I have to add value by enabling her to recognize what's important to me and for me to recognize what's important for her. And then some of us want to go for this thing called closure. That is, ensuring that the conflict is dealt with and the time is right for moving on. Now, I know that my wife likes to create space, but I like to seek closure. I mean, let's finish the conflict now. And somewhere in between, there is a medium place. So, when we create space, what's happening? Well, you are gathering facts. You're putting all the facts of the conflict on the table. You're checking your assumptions. How many of you know that you enter into conflict with your assumption? Do you know what the biggest assumption is when we move into conflict? What's the biggest assumption? I'm right. That's right. That's our biggest assumption. And the second other assumption is the other person is wrong. Now, when we create space, we want to explore the benefits of negotiating. Sometimes we need to change the space and choose the right location. You know, there's sometimes that Twyla and I will have a discussion in bed, and if we've got a conflict, we need to get up and move someplace so that I don't close it by going to sleep. We need to listen carefully to the other person. Sometimes, have you ever been in a conflict situation you just needed to take a break? Okay, you have been back and forth. Maybe the heat has been rising and you need to take a break. Sometimes you even need to seek a mediator, someone who can help both of you to move together. But there's this whole thing called creating space. And then there's adding value. And we add two different kinds of values. Some of us, when we look at adding value of our perspective, we want to understand what are the opinions and what are the beliefs that are being discussed. We want to come up with logical conclusions, logical alternatives. Some of you, as soon as you move into conflict, try to analyze, and you are tolerant of the other person, but you're really analyzing. You want to make clear what you want. And let me encourage you, if you're going to add value, to concentrate on the core of the conflict. Those who add value in this way seem to tend to focus on the positions. Well, my position is right and your position is wrong, rather than focus on what is really the core of the problem. But there are others who take a totally different stance in terms of adding value. Rather than trying to understand, they come in to empathize. They want to know, well, what are the needs that you have? What are the needs that I have? What are you interested in seeing? And they do not want to create a logical alternative. Some of you, when you come in conflict, want to create an option for growth. You want to accept the other person. You want to appreciate the other person. You want to be accepted. You want to be appreciated, not tolerated, not analyzed. Right? You're in a conflict situation. You're not talking to a psychiatrist. So let's just appreciate who I am. And you may need to change first. And you often may have a tendency to concentrate on the people involved. I don't like that person. Rather than even their position. Now, when we see closure, we're using some agreed upon principles as a basis for making decisions. We're taking one step at a time. We're acknowledging the way through this conflict. We're knowing where we go. We're deciding when to review. And we're closing the book on the conflict, and the conflict is over. Now, that's kind of the broad view. Let me give it to you from a pictorial standpoint, and then I want to show you different biblical characters who actually demonstrate this. Remember that as you come in, you want to keep your options open, which means some of you really want to keep options open when you are in conflict. let's just be spontaneous and come up with something spontaneous. And you want to adapt. You want to adapt yourself. You want the other people to adapt. You love change. You want a solution that is very flexible. You want to be flexible. You want to explore. Again, how many of you, when you enter into conflict, the main thing you want to do is explore what's going on. Let's talk about it. And let's focus on the process of coming to conclusion. So let's keep our options open. But on the other hand, some of us just want to get things decided. I mean, let's just make a decision. Look at this first picture. There are lots of roads. You can choose to go down this road. You can choose to go down that road. On the second one, there's one road. We're gonna decide, and things are going to get decided. So we're going to make a decision. I'm going to make a decision. I'm going to be methodical. I'm going to be orderly. I'm going to be systematic. I'm going to be decisive, and I'm going to be focused on the results. Okay? So let's just get things decided and move on. Well, then some of you like stepping out of the problem. In other words, there's a conflict and you just kind of want to step back from the problem. Why? Because if you step back, you can do a logical analysis. If you step back, you have time to be objective. If you step back, you can look at the principles involved. And you want everybody in the problem to be treated exactly equal. Because that's what fair is, right? Fair is everybody treated equally. And so as you're looking for a solution, you're looking at cause and effect. Well, if I do this, this is going to be the effect. If you did this, and that's why it caused that. And we're looking at all the cause and effect. So we're stepping back. And we typically take what we call a dispassionate approach to making a decision in the conflict. Somewhere in our thinking, there is a consistent principle we're going to function on. There's objective criteria. And we're going to arrive at conclusions that treat people impartially, because that's the only way that you can actually deal with a conflict, is to be impartial. And so that's your primary goal. The welfare of the people is secondary to being objective and logical. Okay? But again, some people add value by stepping into the problem. What do I mean by that? Well, they want to take an empathetic consideration. They want to look at things subjectively, because what do they want? They want harmony. They want everybody to like one another. They want the relationships to be good. And what's important to them is the individual. So fair is not everybody treated alike. Fair is everybody treated as a special individual with particular needs. And so they look at, well, if I make this decision, what's going to be the impact on the people around me? So they typically involve themselves in the decision-making situation. They want to understand, what are the values of this other person? What are the concerns of this other person? And they desire to arrive at a conclusion that takes the welfare of the people into account. That's their primary goal. Logic and impartiality is secondary. So what do you have? Well, you have these people who some want to talk about the problem, and some just want to make a decision and close the issue. And some want to step away from the problem and take a logical viewpoint. That's how they add value. But there are others who want to step into the problem and just empathize with people. Can you see where this conflict is going?
Oh, it's getting worse.
It's getting worse, not better. Now, you could keep options open, get things done, step out of the problem, or step into the problem. Let me suggest that even though you can identify probably with either the keeping options open or the getting things decided, and either the stepping out or the stepping in, so you have a way that you prefer to handle conflict. Let me suggest that if we're really going to handle conflict biblically, we've got to do all four. Now, with that understanding, let me give you an illustration. Here is Abraham in Genesis chapter 18. I love this passage of Scripture. God has come, to visit Sarah and Abraham, and then God is going down and he's going to see about the wickedness of Sodom and Gomorrah, and he's about to destroy Sodom, and he says in verse 16, then the men rose up from there and looked down toward Sodom, and Abraham was walking with them to send them off. And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Since Abraham will surely become a great and mighty nation, and in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed. For I've chosen him in order that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, and in order that the Lord may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about him. And so, God's having this conversation with himself going, I'm about to make a judgment on Sodom. Maybe I ought to talk to Abraham about it because I have chosen him and he's going to be a great nation, and I need to let him know what I'm doing. And so the Lord says in verse 20, the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. I will go down now and see if they have done entirely according to its outcry, which has come to me, and if not, I will know. And the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom, while Abraham was still standing before the Lord. So here's the situation. God is about to destroy these two cities. Okay? And Abraham is about to enter into a conflict with God. Because Abraham is going, oh man, that's terrible. You can't do this. Now, he's not telling God you can't do this, okay? But he's thinking that, if I don't do something, if we don't talk about this, if I can't do something, they're gone. So, Abraham came near and said, Lord, wilt thou indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? He said, now I know that there's a principle. You're a righteous God. And I know that you're not going to sweep away the righteous with the wicked. I mean, I know that about you. Because you don't just kill the godly. You'll kill the ungodly. You're not going to kill the godly. So, can we talk about this a little bit? Oh, well, what's he doing? He's beginning to enter into the process because he wants to keep. There are some options. God has already made a decision, but Abraham's saying, no. There are options. Let's discuss this further. And Abraham came near, and he said, suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Wilt thou indeed sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous who are in it? Wow, okay. Here's another option, God. And I know that everybody's not righteous, but what if they're just 50 righteous people? Will you still destroy the righteous with the wicked? Suppose that they're 50. Are you going to do that? And he goes on to say, far be it from thee to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous and the wicked are treated alike. Oh, you can't, we're going to come back to that. You can't treat everybody just alike. Far be it from thee. Shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly? Now what's he doing? He's beginning to argue with the Lord. And he was telling the Lord what the Lord already knew about his justice. So the Lord said, okay, If I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I will spare the whole place on their account. Is that good enough? So what does Abraham do? There's some other options, Lord, we need to talk about.
He's bargaining.
Yeah, he's kind of negotiating with God. Abraham answered and said, Now, behold, I ventured to speak to the Lord, although I am but dust and ashes. Suppose the 50 righteous are lacking 5. Wilt thou destroy the whole city because of 5? And if there's just 45 people in the city, I'm concerned about these 45 righteous people. And he said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. And Abraham spoke to him again and said, suppose the 40 are found there. Okay, Lord, you said if 50 were found there, you wouldn't. Now, and then we got you down to 45. But what about 40? What if 40 righteous are found there? Do you see what he's doing? He is keeping all the options open in his discussions with the Lord. And then he said, I will not do it on account of the 40. Then he said, oh, may the Lord not be angry, and I shall speak. Suppose 30 are found there. And he said, I will not do it if I find 30 there. And he said, now, behold, I venture to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there. And he said, okay, I won't do it on account of the 20. Okay, can I just pose one more option to you, Lord? And he said, behold, I ventured to speak to the Lord. Suppose the 20 are found there. I will not destroy it on account of the 20. Then he said, oh, may the Lord not be angry, and I shall speak only this one. Suppose 10 are found there. And he said, I will not destroy it on account of the 10. What is Abram doing? He is keeping the discussion going. Now, is God going to destroy the city? Probably, but let's talk about this. Let's have a discussion. Have you ever had that kind of a discussion with God? Where you've begun to talk to God and negotiate with God about what God would like to do anyway, but you're the one he's using. Now, I want you to look at verse 33. Because God was the one that said, okay, now we go to closure. Now the discussion is over. And as soon as he, the Lord, had finished speaking to Abraham, the Lord departed. End of discussion. You can't go to 5. You can't go to 1. All the process of conflict resolution has to come to some closure. You can't leave things open forever. Now, those who love the process of keeping their options open would continue to talk about it. But at some point, there needs to be closure. And here God is bringing closure after the options have been talked to. You also begin to see that. This was a conflict situation where a decision had to be made. Now, I want to talk with you about somebody else, and that is Jonah. Turn over to Jonah chapter 1. Now, God is the one, before Abraham is the one who is initiating the conversation and asking for, more time. Now, the Lord is the one who is starting the conversation. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. And Jonah got up and fled to Tarshish. Okay, and Jonah was going, no discussion, Lord. End of discussion. The answer is no, I'm gone. Now, rather, and I think God was wanting to talk to him about it, because if you look later on, there was a proclamation that God was wanting Jonah to give to Nineveh. And that came out in chapter 3. But Jonah didn't even stick around long enough, because from his standpoint, the answer was no. End of discussion. And he left. Now, have you ever done that with somebody? Son, daughter comes to you. Hey, Dad, I want to discuss something about the car. I want to go out. I want to go someplace. I want to be with my friends doing something. And immediately you say no. End of discussion. And and then that's it. Well, what's happening? Well, they're wanting to discuss, and what are we doing? We're cutting it off. Now, the answer may be no in the long run, or maybe yes. I know that I told my kids, if you come to me with a question, can I do something? If we can discuss it, the answer may be yes, or it may be no. But if you need an answer right now, my default is no. So, if you want to come and you want to know right now, you're going to press me? No. If you want to talk about it, I could be persuaded. But that's going to be up to you. Well, here, Jonah, he just cut it off. And he left. Now look at verse 9 also. He's fleeing, and he's on a boat, and there's a storm, and they finally, the crew finally comes to him, and he begins to tell them what's going on. He said, I'm a Hebrew. I fear the Lord God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. The men became extremely frightened, and they said to him, how could you do this? For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them. So here he is. And there he's having a discussion on board the ship with the crew, going, yeah, I know that I'm the reason for this great storm that is about to kill all of you. And it's because I fear God, but I have run away from him. And they're going, how in the world could you do that? So they said to him, what should we do to you that the sea may become calm for us? For the sea was becoming increasingly stormy. And he made a very quick decision, no discussion. He said, pick me up and throw me into the sea. I mean, that's it. If you pick me up, throw me into the sea will calm down. Very simple decision. I think they're more like Abraham. They wanted to talk about it. However, the men rowed desperately to return to land, but they could not, for the sea was becoming even stormier. And they called out to God and said, God, we're going to throw him into the sea. Please don't hold that against us. and they did. And God appointed a great fish to swallow Jonah. And so what was going on? Jonah is a man of decisiveness. There are not many options. No, there's no option of preaching to Nineveh. No, there's no other option but throwing me into the sea. So here it is, end of discussion, decision is made. Okay? Now, are you beginning to see that we function either like Abraham, we want to discuss the issue, or we often are like Jonah, no. It's gone, the end of discussion, we move on. Well, but there's another part of this decision making, and that is stepping out of the problem. You see, with Jonah, according to Jonah 4, after he finally did preach to Nineveh, and after the city repented, and after God forgave them, he got really angry. Why did he get angry? It says, but it greatly displeased Jonah, and he became angry. And he prayed to the Lord and said, please, Lord, was not this what I said while I was still in my own country? Therefore, in order to forestall this, the salvation of Nineveh, see, I don't care about those Ninevites, okay? And here's why he didn't care about the Ninevites. Nineveh was the capital of the most cruel nation in the world. Their military was ruthless. Their punishments were ruthless. They were at the top of the food chain, so to speak, in terms of ruthlessness. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that it was them that introduced the whole idea of crucifixion. It was not the Romans. I mean, they were a ruthless bunch of people. And he knew that they were Israel's enemies, and he knew that they would likely come in and conquer Israel. So the logical thing is, let them be destroyed, and we won't have to deal with them later on. Right? So, I mean, that is very logical. So as Jonah is stepping out of the problem, he understands, I know that thou art a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness, one who relents concerning a calamity. He said, God, I've looked at this situation. I have looked at them, and I have looked at your nature, and I have determined if we give them a chance at all, they may repent. I don't want that. That is not the logical thing to do for my country. So I'm gone. I'm not going to do it. And now that you've done it, I've preached, you've forgiven them, you've given them more years. And by the way, during those years, they did attack Israel. This is not the logical thing to do. Therefore, O Lord, please take my life from me, for death is better than life. Again, that's a really quick decision. I don't even want to talk about it. This is so terrible. The only logical conclusion is for you to kill me now. Wow. So Jonah is one of those, he's not the only one we're going to talk about, but he steps out of the problem. And he looks at it very objectively. He looks at what's fair. He doesn't look at everybody being an individual and we need to be concerned about Nineveh and be about Israel and how that can be worked. No. What's fair is these are wicked people, kill them. These are righteous people, bless them. You're their God, you're not their God. So act like their God and get rid of them. That is the logical thing to do. And very often that's what we do. We're not looking at the needs of the people, we're just looking at it very objectively, which is, if we step out of the problem, we are looking at it objectively, analyzing, being very logical. And some of us, by nature, by our personality, we tend to step out of the problem. But there are some of you who begin to step into the problem. Now, God was one in this situation who stepped into the problem. Look at verse 9 of chapter 4. God said to Jonah, and in the meantime, he didn't take his life. But Jonah made a shelter, sat under it. God appointed a plant, and it grew up and gave him shade. And he was very happy. He says he was extremely happy about the plant. And then God appointed a worm to eat the plant and a scorching wind to come down on Jonah. And Jonah was very angry about those situations because they weren't logical for him. And God said to Jonah, do you have good reason to be angry about the plant? And he said, I have good reason to be angry even to death. And the Lord said, you had compassion on the plant, for which you did not work, and which you did not cause to grow, which came up overnight and perished overnight. Should I not have compassion on Nineveh, the great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know the difference between their right and left hand, as well as many animals? I mean, you're upset because a plant was eaten by a worm and you didn't get shade from the sun, and so you wanted, but you're upset at me because I have compassion on a city that has over 120,000 people that you wanted to be destroyed. What was God doing? God was stepping into the problem. God was taking an empathetic understanding. He knew what was going to happen if he destroyed Nineveh. Now, somehow you need to be able to balance that objectivity and that logical analysis with the empathy of the compassion in that situation. And that's the struggle that we always have. You know, I'm struggling with Twyla. I'm going to step out of the problem. She's going to step into the problem. I'm going to take an objective viewpoint. She's going to take an empathetic viewpoint. Who's right? Well, I am, of course. Remember the main assumption that we had? That in any conflict, I'm right and the other person's wrong? No, we're adding value. Remember? Each of us are right. Each of us have a biblical perspective. It is biblical to be objective. It is biblical to be empathetic. And we need to learn how to balance those. When do I need to yield to the objectivity? When do I need to yield to the empathy? When do I need to discuss and for how long? And when do I need to bring closure because the discussion has gone on long enough? So this is a model for managing conflict. Now, let's look at Abraham back in Genesis 18 again. What was Abraham doing? He was stepping into the situation. He was stepping into the problem. The problem was, do you destroy Sodom and Gomorrah or not? And so not only was he trying to keep options open, but he was trying to step into the problem. And he was concerned for those people. And that's what led him. It was not simply, well, you just go ahead and destroy them. That is a logical thing to do because, they are wicked and they've had their chance and you've given them a lot of leeway, so just kill them. No. He was stepping into the problem and taking a very compassionate, empathetic position. So again, we may favor two of those four positions more than the others, but as a model for conflict resolution, we're needing to look at all those. Are you with me so far? Okay, now, let me say that we may favor a getting things decided and stepping out of the problem. And that may be our strength. So you know what our weakness is? Stepping into the problem and keeping our options open. Or we may be really good at keeping our options open and stepping out of the problem. And that's our strength. And so our weakness is getting things decided and stepping into the problem. Now, what I want to show you is different individuals that had to balance that. So I want to look at similar conflict styles, and we're going to look at what is clear vision and what are some blind spots that we may have to deal with. Now, interestingly enough, when you begin to study personality, you can begin to group different biblical characters having similar styles in terms of personality. In fact, I think it was Navigators did this and did a study and began to kind of identify the personality style of different biblical characters. Now, I went a little bit further, and after they identified them, I began looking at their conflict style, their conflict pairs, and these are 2, 4, 5, 9, 10, 12, 14, 16 different biblical characters that navigators identified as to their style, and then I regrouped them, just not in terms of their overall style, but just the conflict style. I won't tell you how all that was arranged, that's not necessary. But you have people like Jonah and Moses and Joshua and Elijah and Paul, and they tend to handle conflict one way. People like Solomon and Jacob and Luke tend to handle conflict another way. People like Nehemiah, David, Peter, and Martha handle it a third way. And people like King Saul, Aaron, Abigail, and Barnabas tend to go a different way. So there are 4 basic styles of conflict that we move into based on our personality. Now, if you want some of the detail of this later, I'll be happy to give it to you. But again, my point now is just to try to show you how this works from a biblical standpoint. So let's take somebody like Jonah, Moses, Joshua, Elijah, or Paul, okay? And I would suggest that in terms of their styles, they tend to do well seeking closure and adding value by stepping out of the situation. If you look with me at Acts chapter 15, what you discover is a real conflict between Paul and Barnabas. Okay? Now, they had gone on a missionary journey, and they had taken someone called John Mark with them. And, you're on this missionary journey, and everything's going well, and for some reason, Mark decides that he's going to leave. And he just ups and abandons them in the midst of their missionary journey. And I can kind of imagine how Paul felt about that. I mean, Barnabas was a son of encouragement. He probably encouraged him a lot. But here they are in chapter 15 and verse 36, and they want to go again on a second missionary journey. And Barnabas was desirous of taking John, called Mark, along with them also. But Paul kept insisting they should not take him along. Why not? He left. I mean, he abandoned us once. And I can imagine Paul, the logical thing to do, he's already proven himself, let's not go there again. And Paul insisted they should not take him along, who had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. The logical thing to do is, no, we're not taking him again. Now, there was a great disagreement between the two of them. Paul was seeking closure. He was looking at it objectively, and they couldn't reach a conclusion, and so they parted. And they had Barnabas took Mark with him, and did a great job, by the way. He didn't desert at that time. Interesting. Years later, Paul would write and send me Mark because he is useful to me. And the word useful means he's personally useful to meet my needs. So there was a change, but it took a long time. Now, in terms of closure, look at Galatians chapter 2. In Galatians chapter 2, Cephas, Peter had come to Antioch, and Paul is writing to the Galatians and said, I opposed him to his face. I mean, this was not done behind his back. I mean, it was right out there in the open. I just stood up to him and said, Peter, you're wrong for coming For prior to the coming of certain men from James, he used to eat with the Gentiles. But when they came, he began to withdraw and hold himself aloof, fearing the party of the circumcision. And the rest of the Jews joined him in hypocrisy, with the result that even Barnabas was carried away with their hypocrisy. But when I saw that they were not straightforward about the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas, in the presence of all, if you being a Jew live like the Gentiles, not like the Jews, how is it that you compel the Gentiles to live like the Jews? And he goes on, and what is he doing? He is just out there. Now, this is one of those decisions that there's no discussion. You know, I'm really not interested in why you want to withdraw. And, you know, I mean, it's hypocrisy. It's wrong. End of discussion. You know, that's it. And I think Paul was pretty good at seeking closure and looking at things objectively. He's not real good at taking time to elicit everyone's opinions. You know, I don't know that he listened. I'd be interested in maybe finding out how long did he listen to Barnabas before he just, no, this is not going to, because this is a sharp disagreement. He wasn't listening too much. And often becoming annoyed when others want to reopen something they believed was over. I mean, Jonah's another good one in chapter 4. I mean, Jonah already closed the issue. God, this is a dead issue. I've already said no. So, you know, God had to do some things to reopen the issue. Has God ever told you to do something and you said no? Yeah, I think you have. And did you get away with it? I mean, did God go, well, I guess the issue is closed? Or did he reopen the issue and maybe prepare a big fish for you so that he got your attention, and so now you're on talking terms again, and so now he can say to you, now I want you to go to Nineveh, and this is what I want you to preach, and this is how I want you to handle it, and you know, you begrudgingly went because you didn't want to get that fish again, and so Jonah was like that. There was a blind spot of that moving into that situation, understanding it from God's perspective. Well, there are other people like Solomon and Jacob and Luke. They're good at creating space and adding value. In other words, stepping out. Jacob, I don't have time to go into all the details with Jacob in Genesis, but I love Jacob's dealings with Laban. Jacob has worked for Laban for 7 years to get Rachel. And then at the last minute, there's that switch. And he winds up getting Leah instead of Rachel. So he says, okay, I'll work another 7 years for Rachel. So now he's worked 14 years. He's gotten Rachel, but he wants to leave. But he doesn't have anything. I mean, and so he goes to Laban and he says, look, I've been with you 14 years and you've admitted to me that you have prospered and God has blessed you because of me. I want you to give me something. And Laban, asked him what, and Jacob is smart enough to know it doesn't matter what he asks, the answer is no. So he says, I'll tell you what, I'll work for you for another, I don't know if it was a year, he didn't mention the time frame, a year or two, but I'll tell you what I'll do. You take out all the speckled sheep. You see, sheep were white and goats were black, or they were brownish toward black. And every once in a while you got a hybrid, which was speckled, a speckled sheep, a speckled goat. And Jacob says, tell you what, I'm going to, you take all those out. I'll take care of your herds. If you just give me the speckled ones when we get done, that'll be sufficient. Now, Laban's a good businessman, and he knows that the average shepherd is going to get 20% of a flock. Okay, and he also knows there is no way that the 20% is going to be speckled. This is a great deal. So he enters into the deal with Jacob. And Jacob volunteers to take the speckled ones away. Laban says, no, I'm going to do that. And he takes them 3 days away. And now Jacob now has to deal with the current flock, which is white and black. Now, I don't know, it had to be from God, because if you look at it genetically, and I know that Jacob was not a geneticist, okay, but what he did made sense genetically, because what he did was he made it the strongest. Those were hybrid sheep and goats, and the strong white ones probably had, they think, a recessive gene, which if you take a strong and put them together, guess what you get? You get a hybrid speckled sheep that is strong. Okay? And you do the same thing with the goats. But if you take the weak ones and put them together, you're going to have weak white ones. So again, how God gave him that, there's another reason in there in addition to this one. But I think Jacob, that was a very creative solution to his problem. He analyzed the options and he went, you know what? There is no way this man who's a cheat and a fraud, my father-in-law, is going to give me anything, but here's a creative solution, and I think he'll go for it, which he did. And so Jacob, devoted time to exploring the conflict. He played the devil's advocate with Laban. He created space. He added value by stepping out and did what was logical. But his blind spot, I think he may have held on to the conflict a little bit too long. Because if you look at Genesis 31, the first two, the commentator begins to talk about Jacob and his cousins, I guess they were. It was his father-in-law's kids. And their cousins or uncles, I guess. Anyway, they got really upset because he stole all their wealth. And so trouble was brewing between Laban's family and Jacob. So Jacob said, I got to leave. So he left. May have held it open too long, took all the wealth. I mean, he stripped the man of everything, and then he took off. So again, you can talk about Solomon, you can talk about Luke in terms of being objective and yet creating space. Nehemiah is a great one. In Nehemiah chapter 5, in terms of seeking closure and adding value. Again, I won't read you all of Nehemiah chapter 5, but here's the deal. Nehemiah comes back to the land, and the people are charging usury, which means that they're charging interest, really high interest, kind of like Kenya used to do with the interest. Couldn't believe the interest rate here when I got here at 30-40%. But anyway, they're all charging usury to their brothers and putting them in bondage. And Nehemiah, David, Peter, Martha, they're good at seeking closure, but also adding value by stepping in. And he's really saying, he's appealing to them, this isn't fair. It isn't fair to your brothers. You shouldn't be treating your brothers like this. The usury shouldn't be used to put your brothers in bondage. I mean, you're their brothers. Don't you have a heart? It's literally what he's saying. And the people all agree. And they go, okay, you're right. We're going to live in harmony with our brothers. We're not going to charge them usury anymore. And so he brought the issue to closure, but he did it in a way that left it harmonious. It was an amicable closure, and he stepped into the situation and helped everybody to see the need to be compassionate and empathetic toward their brothers. Now, in terms of a blind spot, though, you look at John, look at Peter and John. Sometimes a blind spot in terms of creating space and stepping out, you can be a very compassionate person, but you can reach a premature conclusion in a conflict. Now, here's Peter, and he's in a conflict. He's in the Garden of Gethsemane, right? The soldiers come. And and they're about to take Jesus. And so what does Peter do? He does the only thing that objectively and logically he should do, which is kind of out of character for him. That's his weak spot. So he grabs his sword and cuts off the ear of the high priest's servant. It's the logical thing to do. I'm going to pick up the sword and I'm going to defend Jesus with the sword. And Jesus rebukes him and not able to do that. But sometimes you can reach a premature conclusion. I got to do this. And especially if you are good at stepping in and being empathetic, sometimes in the heat of the moment you take an objective viewpoint and you don't come across too well. In terms of creating space and adding value. In other words, talking about it and stepping in and finding out what the people want. Well, again, King Saul, although it got him in trouble, he was able to listen to all points of view. God said, kill Amalek, kill the people, destroy the cattle. That was really clear. And yet, King Saul, he didn't. And then when he was confronted by Samuel, his response was, but I talked with the people about this. And the people decided that we could really take the animals and sacrifice them to God. Well, okay, he is listening to all points of view. Remember, Aaron listened to the people's voices. Also, he probably discussed this with them before he made the golden calf. And even Barnabas probably gave Paul a chance to express himself and wanted to discuss this. So again, you can be strong with clear vision and stepping into the situation and being empathetic. Sometimes you can make the wrong decision that way. But what you're not good at is avoiding logically analyzing negative alternatives. In other words, do you think Barnabas really looked at the alternatives? Aaron. Do you think Aaron looked at the alternatives? The negative alternatives of, if I don't make it, they might do this to me, but if I do make this golden calf, what's the result there? Or King Saul. Yeah, the people really want me to do this. But what's the negative alternative if I do this? Well, the negative alternative is I may lose the kingdom. I'm going to disobey God. There's something that's going to come out of it. And so again, we can be strong into those areas, weak into those areas, and basically we need to begin to develop all four of those if we're going to help conflict truly be resolved. Now let me just close with this real quick. People who are like Jonah, generally, the cause of conflict for them is someone who's challenged your authority, God's authority, the structure, what's right and what's wrong. And the desired outcome is, we just want to close it. And do you have any feelings in the matter? No. You may probably have strong feelings, but you deny that they exist. And people like that, generally, they just like when the conflict is over. So they're decisive, they're planned, they're organized, and critical and blunt. I think Jonah was pretty critical and pretty blunt in what he was doing. But if you go back, again, that's not just Jonah, but those kind of people like Jonah, they've got some things in common when they look at conflict. On the other hand, people like Abraham, What was Abraham's problem? Somehow it challenged his internal value system. It challenged his values in terms of the individuality, the worth of the individual. It challenged his understanding of God. And what did he want? You know, he just wanted God to listen to him. Even if God cut it off and said, okay, I'm cutting it off at 10, at least he got him down to 10, you know? And so he was dealing with his emotions. He was taking in the concerns of other people. He was wanting to explore, and he was satisfied. We had the process. God brought it to closure, but at least I got him down to 10. And so, people like Abraham are sensitive and attuned to people's needs, although at times they worry about everybody. I mean, he worried about everybody in Sodom. You know, what was going to happen to them? And then you've got people like Solomon and Jacob, issues of trust. And so they're objective, and they search for what is right. At times they're often stubborn. Jacob was often very stubborn. Solomon was often objective, searching for what was right. What was right with the baby that the two harlots said both belonged to them? Well, he also came up with an innovative solution. We're going to cut them in half and give half to each of the women. And then the real mother said, no, don't do that. That was an innovative solution to a hard problem, just like Jacob had to come up with an innovative solution. And then people like Nehemiah and Peter, when their beliefs, what they really believe in, is really challenged. And what do they want? Intact relationships. What was Nehemiah wanting with the people? Harmony, intact relationships. He was trying to seek communication. He was trying to be harmonious. He didn't want anybody to be bitter at anybody else. And so people like that are generally warm and seek harmony, and sometimes even want to smother, being so kind. So what are we saying about all this in closing? Well, this is a model for managing conflict. And what we need to do is we need to learn when to be objective and step out. When to be empathetic and step in. When do we process? When do we bring to closure? And we need to begin to develop all of those so that when we are in conflict, we can choose to go on either side. We can choose to balance that so that we can resolve conflict in a biblical way, like these men did. Is that making sense to you? Okay. Let's go ahead and pray. Father, I thank you for the model that you have given us, and I thank you for the men that have lived that out. And I pray that we would understand that. I pray that we would begin to learn how to emulate them, to emulate the Lord Jesus, to use this to resolve conflict in the right way, in a biblical way. Father, take these scriptures and take them to our heart. In Jesus' name, amen.